from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And ahead for you today from Iowa State University, Lee Schulz on the cattle market trends. He'll look at the market implications of last Friday's USDA cattle on feed report. And Lee will discuss the interesting twists and turns in the choice to select beef price spread. Then K-State's Jaymelynn Farney will talk about managing bottle calves resulting from this spring's calving season. She'll outline what she calls the 5 C's of bottle calf care. And on the next part of her series on price risk management for you cow-calf producers, K-State's Jenny Ifft will talk about fitting that livestock risk protection insurance to one's overall herd economic management approach. All that straight ahead on this Agriculture Today. Thanks once again for listening in to Agriculture Today. This is our Monday edition, and we'll begin on the cattle markets as usual to start the week. This time with Lee Schulz joining us. He is a livestock economist out of Iowa State University. Of course, Lee, we will take up the numbers from the USDA's cattle on feed report last Friday, which were sort of anticipated but still carried some punch. Back to this past trading week, though, the fed cattle market seemed to hold largely steady. Is that how you read it?
I look at it both ways from a cash and futures. We've seen similar. So we've seen cash cattle traded in 138 live. You did see some sales, 140 to 142. I think it was a few cents higher compared to year ago levels. The 5 market average was about 40 cents higher. Dress prices were in that 221 range, maybe a little bit higher, 223. I think as you look out, there's a lot of optimism in the fed cattle market when you look at the futures prices. But we've pushed that off now into the fourth quarter of 2022 and into 2023. What we had of 147 highs in the April 2022 contract now is back down to 140. And so, it's really a short time period that we really take some out of this fed cattle market. But overall, I want to highlight that there's some optimism there, and you don't have to look much further than those live cattle futures prices. Feeder cattle, there was some sideways trade. I think as you go out to some deferred contracts, they were $2 lower. But right now, feeder cattle futures are showing a lot of incentive to hold on to cattle a few more months. There's really this stepwise from the March to the April to the May. You're looking at about a $10 rise in those feeder cattle futures prices. I think when you look at some of these cash sales for feeder cattle, I think you're pairing that against, some optimism further out, the ability to hold those calves, but also some short-term needs. And so why I think you're seeing some cash sales higher is because you're seeing some of those markets bid up a little bit to pull those calves out.
Well, let's bring in here that USDA cattle on feed report. It was anticipated going in that placements would definitely be higher this month, but 9% higher caught a few people off guard.
I think, this is almost like a broken record. We always talk about placements because that's always the number with this huge range. Even coming into a report, pre-report, it was 4% higher to almost 10% higher year over year in the February placement numbers. It came in at the top end of that. So we were 9.3% higher than a year ago. Now, if we look back at February 2021, we got to remember there were some big storms, especially in the Southern Plains, that really did slow placements for the month of February. So we're comparing to a bit lower number, but overall, we have continued to see placements large. So it continues that story of these larger placements. I think we certainly are pulling feeder cattle ahead because we don't have the forage available necessarily to hold them longer. And so they are entering the feedlots. That's a big part going on. We're seeing more heifers enter the feedlots. That's a big part of the story. But I think we also need to look at, there's this dynamic going on when you look at small feedlots, and I follow that here in Iowa because about 40% of our sales are from small feedlots. Those placements were up drastically too. And so I think, there is still some optimism in cattle feeding. even though as we've started the show here, we're seeing futures prices lower than they have been, corn prices much higher, but placements, there continues to be higher placements year over year. And I think that does speak to a bit of that optimism, especially when I look at that small farmer feeder here in Iowa, those numbers are larger.
And the marketing's number, to note, was up as well, helping to a certain extent keep pace here. So have to factor that in.
And I really, that marketing number is a big factor to watch. Now, we did have the same marketing days as a year ago. Slaughter levels were higher. But as we look at that cattle on feed over 120 days, we are lower than a year ago. That helps point to we are current, but we are still much higher than the 5-year average before that. And so I think we have maybe improved a little bit that currentness, but there's still some ways to go. Certainly the high cost of gain will help with that, as I think we're likely to see a little bit quicker marketing pace, especially if slaughter levels continue. We don't see much disruptions in packing. I think we could really current up this market a little bit more.
Then the takeaway from this cattle on feed report, really no push either direction as far as market response, do you think?
I think a lot of this was already bid into the prices we've seen, especially the placements number. I think from just the trend that we've been seeing, as well as if you look at those feeder cattle futures prices, fed cattle price, I think there was just a lot of expectation we'd see these bigger numbers. I don't see it a big shock to the market. Again, I don't think it's really a ho-hum report where, it doesn't tell us a lot. I think it certainly does speak to these trends that are going on, but I don't see it as a really big shocker here.
Now, to note, another USDA report is out, the cold storage report. What numbers were within that caught your attention, Lee?
Well, if you're looking for maybe a little bit bigger of a shocker, I think it was the cold storage report. You're seeing higher levels than a year ago. You're seeing higher levels than the 5-year average. This was the highest end of February beef inventory on record. A big part of driving that was the cuts in cold storage. So those were 30% higher than a year ago, a little bit more than the 5-year average, a little bit more than about 32% higher than the 5-year average. Now, that's only about 8% of the total cold storage inventory, but those are building up. And so, that is a little bit of indicative of demand. I think we are maybe seeing that pace slow a little bit. And so that product that's being staged there is, I would say, building up a little bit. When you look at the grinding product or the boneless product, that was up slightly compared to a year ago levels. But there, I think we've just seen such great movement of grinding beef that, I don't think there's too much of a worry there. So, cold storage report, I think, kind of gives us a indication of the marketplace, that interplay between supply and demand. And some signals are there. I think we are seeing that pace slow a little bit. But also, this is the time of year to see that because, again, we're looking back at the end of February. This data is obviously delayed being released, just the time accumulating it. We expect that to pick up as we're entering, prime beef demand season, right? As summer grilling is starting to come into focus.
Looking forward to that, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
Let's finish with this, Lee, and it's from an article you recently put together on the Iowa State website. You commented on the choice to select beef price spread, and this following what was an unusual inversion in that price relationship in late February. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, as a market analyst, when you see some quirks in the market, they're pretty easy to highlight. And one was, if you go back to February 22nd here, you've seen that actually choice traded at a discount to select. And that seems kind of paradoxical, right? Because choice is more expensive when you look at retail. It's also more costly to produce. So why would it be at a lower price to select? Now, this happens in the marketplace. If you go back the data to 2004, it's happened 19 times in the daily data, so very few times. But there are some quirks that happen. really, when you break it down, it was because of how those primal values traded. So you've seen the chuck, the brisket, the round traded at a discount choice relative to the select comparable cuts. The big part driving it was actually loins. Choice loins were discounted relative to select loins. And similarly, you didn't see a really big premium on ribs for choice versus select. And so aggregately, you had a negative choice select spread. Now, the next day it bounced back to more normal levels. But I think that shows just some of the volatility that we've really faced since the beginning of the year, that we're seeing volatility in fed cattle prices, but you're also seeing it in wholesale prices as well as retail prices.
And typically that choice to select spread will widen seasonally as we move into the summertime?
Exactly. And that's really what we're entering a period now where you're going to see less choice cattle available relative within the year when we compare that. And so what that means is there's more incentive for choice cattle now, right? Because if the supply is lower, the market is going to incentivize it. But as a producer, you need to pair that against these high cost of gains, right? So to achieve choice and even prime, those premiums are large. They're likely going to get larger, especially seasonally here, but the cost of gains are much, much higher. So to achieve that, it's very, very difficult or more difficult than we faced here, more recently in the last couple of years. And so, that calculus changes for producers then.
Again, Lee put together a very good article on this topic. You can find it at the Iowa State Ag Decision Makers website. To get there, simply search for Iowa State Ag Decision Makers. Very easy to find. Lee, we appreciate your comments. Many thanks to you.
Thank you.
Lee Schulz with us on the cattle markets, livestock economist, Iowa State University. And we'll return with more. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today resumes now, and for those of you with a spring calving beef cow herd, we're likely right in the throes of your calving activity. Once in a while, you'll end up with a bottle calf, one that needs special attention because the cow or heifer is reluctant to nurse that calf, or there may be other complications. We've invited in K-State Beef Systems Specialist Jaymelynn Farney today to talk about managing such calves to a healthy and eventually a growthy outcome. And Jaymelynn, dealing with bottle calves, well, it's extra effort required of the producer, of course, but doing it right ends up being pretty darned important.
Yes, and unfortunately, that's a fact of life. Everybody's had to deal with it, and it's not something you can really prevent. I mean, those young heifers sometimes just do not take to being a mom. You have twins or a hard pull, and that cow is, having trouble getting up for a while. And we know how important that colostrum is for that baby calf. Just wanting to throw that out there right off the bat. You have to get colostrum in them in those first couple hours, maximum of 6. So if you got a down cow, a cow who cannot nurse her calf right away. And there's, several keys to success, but also pretty easy ways to lead to some problems for your calves. So you want to make sure to minimize problems. You need to have the 5 C's for a healthy start: colostrum, calories, cleanliness, comfort, and consistency. And that'll kind of be, the starting point of what we're going to talk about.
Let's run right through those. And you mentioned getting that colostrum in right off the bat, essential for calf survival. Talk about just assuring that one does that the right way, Jaymelynn.
Yes, sir. The most important time, as I kind of mentioned, the first 24 hours, you need to make sure you get an appropriate amount of colostrum. But even more than that, within the first 6 hours. Why is the 6 hours so important? Well, within the gut, there is a time when they do not absorb the immunoglobulins, which that's the antibody type of component of the colostrum that is needed to help protect the calf. Because baby calves are born essentially immunocompromised. They don't have antibodies. They get all of it from the colostrum of the dam. So Within the first couple of hours, they are able to absorb maximum absorption, which just makes you think, man, this system doesn't seem very good anyways. But maximal absorption of immunoglobulins is 50%. That's within the first few hours. By 6 hours after birth, you only get about 20% absorption of those immunoglobulins. So you want to make sure you get a lot in early. So what is a lot? Here's the numbers, and I know as you're listening, you're not going to be able to write these down, so hopefully you can go and find those later, but they need 5% of their body weight within the first 20 minutes and 10% of their body weight within the first 6 hours. So that means you need to feed roughly 2 liters within 20 minutes and another 2 liters in 6 hours. You're not going to get in trouble if you have a calf between 80 to 100 pounds doing this, 2 liters and 2 liters.
That's a good standard to go by then.
Yes. And the other part, like I said, we need to get those immunoglobulins in, but the colostrum also helps stave off dehydration. Quality colostrum. Okay. Ideally, if you can get high quality colostrum from cows within your own herd, it is the best thing because your cows are exposed to the bacteria, virus, the environmental conditions that those calves are going to be exposed to. So that is the best quality of colostrum to help protect those calves. From that dam is really good if you can get her milked out. Sometimes you can't. You don't want to use colostrum from really thin cows. Cows that are in body condition score 4 or less, we know have lower immunoglobulin levels. So when you're looking to find a colostrum on your farm, good conditioned cow who's not actively sick and has been appropriately vaccinated, that's who you use. You could use colostrum replacer, which is another good alternative, not the colostrum supplement. So you can see the 2 bags out there when you go shopping, but
they're different, right?
They are different. The replacer, as the name says, is what you can do if you have no colostrum. The supplement, in theory, is supposed to help boost whatever colostrum you have. However, the research shows that the supplement is not been actually beneficial and leads to more negatives because of a dilution of the quality ingredients you want, because those calves do like to drink that supplement. So you have colostrum and calories. So those kind of go in, back to back. Cleanliness. As you know, pathogen loads, and in the calf scours and bacterial scours with bottle baby calves are very, very common. And luckily, that is something that we can manage for. That's where it takes a little bit of time and commitment. Clean and disinfect your feeding instruments. That is the bottom line. Clean and disinfect your feeding instruments. Warm water. Go ahead and clean with a soap. Rinse them. And they do make some calf bottle disinfectants. You can go ahead and do a quick rinse with those and keep them dry. You can paper towel dry them if you need to use them immediately, but make sure you store them somewhere where they can have airflow and air dry. So those are some really important components to keep them clean from the bottle side. Keep your calf environment clean. Put down good, nice straw. Remove the fecal matter as much as possible. If you have multiple calves in one area, if one of them's starting to get sick, segregate it from the others. Those are just some cleanliness, biosecurity type of things you need to worry about. And the hay kind of goes into my 4th C of comfort. The happier you keep those calves, the more consumption they get, more calories. All of these just dovetail into each other.
You need to be consistent with the cleanliness part of this, though, and the comfort for that matter, and stay on top of it perpetually until these calves are really up and going several weeks down the road.
Yes. and consistently when you are feeding them. You think about these calves, you can't feed them 2 bottles one day, 3 bottles the next day, feed them every 10 hours one day. And just like when we're feeding finishing calves, the more consistent you can keep your feeding time, the better for their digestive system.
So consistency is the 5th C in your list?
That was the 5th C.
All of this is important to stay on top of, Jaymelynn. There's a lot going on during the calving season, depending on how long that stretches out for a given producer. You need to commit, maybe that's a 6th C, to all of these requirements to make sure that bottle calf is going to be healthy.
Yes, sir. And it is a commitment. Because when do you think you need to wean a calf from milk? 5 weeks might be the earliest that you can start pulling them from the milk offering. We mentioned during that first couple of days, you want to feed 10% of body weight. And that's kind of what you want to feed from your milk perspective the entire time your calves are on feed. You can feed them twice a day, but you only want to feed about 2 liters at each feeding. So that kind of tells you how many times you need to feed your calves a day. Because if you need to feed them 6 liters, you need to feed them 3 times a day. So you get to do a little bit of math. And as the calves grow, they get heavier. They're going to drink more milk. And, milk replacer is pretty expensive. So this, another commitment. You have to be committed to the cost expenses. By 2 weeks of age, you can start offering a palatable calf supplement and grain that needs to be left out 24/7. You don't want that to run dry. They need to be able to pick on it and have grassy alfalfa or some kind of a good long stem hay out there as well. You can put that out early, 3, 4, 5 days of age, and let them just kind of play and pick with it. Because the sooner they get to eating it, the quicker you can reduce the amount of milk replacer you are feeding those animals. If they have been, at about 5 weeks of age, really look into it and see if they've been eating grain pretty consistently for a week at about 1.5 pounds a day, they're ready to be weaned off of your milk replacer.
Stick to it, though. Make sure that they hit those marks before you pull that milk replacer. Jaymelynn, we appreciate you very much sharing all of this with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be on the program.
She's Jaymelynn Farney, Beef Systems Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll return with more for you after this. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today is back now as we move ahead with this series on price risk management for you cow-calf producers. Along the way once more is risk management economist with K-State Research and Extension, Jenny Ifft. And Jenny, we have in the last few visits been concentrating on the Livestock Risk Protection insurance program. And today your intent is to get into how it can fit with various management strategies on the part of the producer.
Right. We want to not just look at how it works, we want to look at whether or not it works for a particular type of operation.
And we're going to break this down into different groups, one of which would be the producer who is very much focused on their cost management. Explain, if you will.
Right. So I think there's a lot of cow-calf producers out there who really focus on costs and keeping costs low, and they're going to self-insure against price declines, most likely because they have another source of income and they don't have the time available or the desire to spend more time on management. And these operations can survive low price years because they have those external sources of income. And so they might think of price risk as more, high price years are a bonus. And so if you think about these groups, something like LRP, might not seem very attractive because you're looking at upfront costs that go from $1 to $7 per hundredweight. And if you look at the high end of that, especially with the inflation we're seeing right now, and I'm going to say you're going to have to spend an extra $40 per head, that might not sound very good. The exception that I'd like to point out that they may want to consider is using LRP for catastrophic coverage. So there's some some years, maybe, 1 out of 10 years, it doesn't happen that often, where prices can drop a lot between calving and when you plan to market. So, 2015, you can see prices drop $40, $50 per hundredweight within a couple months. Mm-hmm. So LRP is going to, at lower coverage levels, is going to be a lot cheaper, and it will make payouts infrequently, but during years where prices drop quite a bit. So that may be one type of protection to consider.
Those, you say, though, Jenny, that fall under the heading of active managers might find LRP very much a routine action on their part.
Right. And by active management, what I mean is sort of large managements or operations that are very reliant on cow-calf production for income, that fall into this category. And they spend a lot of time on management. They likely know their cost of production. They know what a break-even price is. You have a marketing plan. You might have some experience with hedging or futures markets or marketing arrangements that help you manage price risk. So for an operation that has this in place, assessing the value of LRP for that operation should be a relatively straightforward exercise. And they should be able to see fairly quickly whether or not it fits. It might be cost-effective for some. For others, it might not have enough flexibility if you're using a more complicated or sophisticated hedging strategy. But regardless, that should be a straightforward decision to make.
Should be fairly clear-cut. Yeah. But then there is the potential gray area. That would be those who are more of moderate managers when it comes to cow-calf price risk.
Yeah, and this is sort of the in-between category before the previous two. And this is where you may not be having full-time management, but maybe your production expenses. Maybe you're considering hedging during price years, or you do something else to actively manage price risk. Calf income isn't going to make or break your operation, but it's going to hurt when prices are low. And it's this group that this whole series is actually aimed at. And for this group, LRP can help make calf income more predictable and a cost that's designed to be favorable to the producer. So you could say LRP is supposed to makes payments in years when prices drop. And the way it's designed is so a producer is more likely to receive more in indemnities or payouts in the long run than in premiums.
Very well. We will tie off this series next week. And what you're going to do at that point, Jenny, you tell us, is share the news on a new decision aid tool that you and colleagues have been working on here at K-State to figure out what approach to price risk management a given cow-calf operator might want to pursue. So we'll get into that then. Thank you for coming over once more.
Thank you.
Jenny Ifft, risk management economist, K-State Research and Extension. And once more, she has been contributing to this ongoing series of price risk management considerations for you cow-calf producers. Our time's away once more. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.